This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC and JZ Microphones. So get ready to rock.
If you can organize your life, you're going to be doing it, you're going to be getting better at it, and you're going to be more ready to be ready when the lightning strikes. You're going to have the goods because lightning will strike. I mean, you're going to be in that situation where someone's looking for a song or they're looking for an engineer, looking for a guitar player or something. If you've got the goods, then you've got a shot.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. This episode is sponsored by OWC, Otherworld Computing, which you can find at OWC.com, your trusted source for memory and speed upgrades, DIY installs, and used Macs for your studio. Let OWC focus on keeping your studio Mac in killer condition so that you can focus on making great music. Why ditch your existing Mac when you can take your studio far into the future with OWC? Learn more at OWC.com and learn how you can supercharge your studio Mac, the speed to create, the capacity to dream. Now find out how awesome your studio can be at OWC. This episode is sponsored by JZ Microphones with a unique golden drop capsule design. The Vintage Series V67 and V11 microphones offer Class A discrete amplifier circuitry, extremely low self-noise, and advanced built-in shock mount technology to bring a rich, warm sound to your studio with crisp clarity and detail that will make you wish that you had discovered these mics a whole lot sooner. Go to jzmic.com or click the link in the show notes below to get 50% off any mic at JZ Microphones right now during their 2-week summer sale. Howdy Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw. Welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals and also sometimes songwriters so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Steve O'Brien, a songwriter who originally moved from Connecticut down to Nashville in 1973. He spent several years working at offices and studios of Owen Bradley, Chet Atkins, and Ray Stevens, and had a couple of songs enter the Billboard Top 100 country chart in the mid-'70s. He then built his own recording studio and formed Steve OBrien Music BMI in '76 to be the worldwide publisher of his own compositions, which have sold over 10 million copies. During the 80s, Steve engineered and produced numerous demo and master recordings by artists such as John Hyatt, Kennedy Rose, Malcolm Holcomb, Ronnie Rogers, Fred Kohler, Vince Gill, Marty Stewart, Highway 101, Reba McEntire, and many others. And in 1990s, Steve co-wrote and published the Brooks and Dunn hit Rock My World, Little Country Girl, co-written with Bill LaBounty. Over the following years, he had additional songs recorded by platinum-selling artists such as John Michael Montgomery, Don Williams, Larry Stewart, and others. He also co-wrote the theme song for the G. Gordon Liddy radio show, Here Comes the G-Man. Steve's songs have been featured on numerous recent recordings, including 2 songs on Danni Nicholls' Mockingbird Lane album, which was nominated for UK Americana Association 2017 Album of the Year Award. Steve co-wrote all 10 songs on JJ Lawhorn's 2018 album, The Huntsman, produced by Jeremy Stover, which recently topped 1 million streams. Recent releases also include Southern Halo and Bailey James, produced and engineered at his studio, and now climbing the Music Row country independent charts. If that wasn't enough, Steve also published a novel called The Ferrari Club in 2013. So I'm really excited to be hanging with Steve, who's been a longtime friend of mine too. And I've done some co-writing with him as well. Please welcome Steve O'Brien to Recording Studio Rockstars. Steve, are you ready to rock?
Yes, sir. How you doing, Lidge? Thanks for having me here.
I'm doing good, man. It's nice to have you here. I know we've been talking about doing this for a while, and it's exciting to finally have you on the podcast.
Well, I've just enjoyed so much listening to the other podcasts. I feel privileged to be in such elite company.
Well, I appreciate that. And you've always said really kind things about this show. And getting a chance to take a closer look at your biography, your bio, it's cool to learn all these things about what you've done that I didn't know otherwise yet. So It's really cool to see all this stuff you've done. I didn't know you had recorded so many people, and been here, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, really working your butt off on music in Nashville.
Yeah, that's what I was doing. One little thing I needed to mention, I did not produce the Southern Halo thing.
Okay, all right, cool.
But the other things I did recently. I spent a lot. It was about 10 years or so where I was just recording day and night. So, and I was fortunate to work with some really, really, really great people. It just made the days fun.
Yeah. Well, so talk a little bit about, in your own words, who you are and how you got into this stuff. I mean, what got you interested in music and songwriting in the first place?
I just always loved music. I remember when I was a little kid sitting at my grandmother's piano, I would just sort of plink on it, and I was probably just a few years old or whatever, but I just always loved music, and got our first guitar when I was 13 or so, and just was sort of obsessed with music.
What sort of records were you listening to at that time? Were you surrounded by a real influence of recorded music?
Yeah, obviously back then it was, the people that were popular were the people like the Beatles and Jimi Hendrix, Rolling Stones and all. And then as now, I think I just really love all kinds of music. So I was a music minor in college and studied some classical, but now I just listen to everything actually. So just always loved music.
I remember going through the process of discovering music that I grew to love when I was just a listener. You start out with fans of a few things, and then you discover something totally new and different.
Right.
And then I also remember later, through the process of learning how to create music in the studio, a new chapter of discovery where it's like, there's a whole bunch of music which are like, I'll never like that. And then all of a sudden I grow to appreciate the craft by which it's made. And I have a complete, about face on my perspective, and you really expand your appreciation of music.
Right. That's interesting you say that, because I'll do that sometimes. I know there was the producer here that many years ago I'd heard that he would, if something was a hit and he didn't like it, or something that came out that was a big hit and he didn't really get it, he would just buy a copy and listen over and over, trying to determine what was so special about it. But you can't like everything.
That's true. You don't have to like it in the very end, and you don't have to go out and see the show.
Right.
But, I talked about this before. In fact, previous guest, Bill Demain, we were just talking about this, that for me, growing up with kids, the kids always wanted to listen to music that would not necessarily have been. Gwen Stefani, for example, was somebody I discovered because they just wanted to keep listening to a record.
Right.
And then through those repeated listens, I grew to have this huge appreciation and love for that music and the production and everything.
Sure.
Which I never would have had. Another one was the soundtrack to Annie from the 80s movie.
Yeah.
That showed up. I hated musicals. Boy, did I hate musicals growing up. And now I've grown to just really love
Tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I remember
but like if you go listen
Broadway.
to that, if you go listen to the album, just the orchestration, the instrumentation is amazing.
Right.
And the recording's spot on,
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, it's cool. I encourage you rock stars to take Steve's advice and the other producers and just go listen to the shit out of some stuff that you don't like yet.
Or that you don't really get.
Or that you don't get,
Yeah, what is so special about that?
Yeah, especially if it's popular.
Yeah.
If there's a good reason for listening to it. Okay, so you came down to Nashville in the 70s. What was that experience like? I mean, to start out working with Owen Bradley, maybe you can introduce us to who he is, because I know that's Bradley's barn, right?
Yeah, Owen Bradley was one of the real pioneers here. He was just a fantastic producer and built the original Quonset hut, I believe, studio, which is still there inside the Sony building there. I think it's Curb or something now. But and I think I believe they are not actually using it as a studio. But then It's probably one of the classic studios in Nashville. So many of the Billy Sherrill records were all done there. Tammy Wynette, George Jones, and people. He just produced everybody really back in his era. People like Patsy Cline, Ernest Tubb, Loretta Lynn, and all. So he was, I guess he was in his 60s at the time, and I was living down on Music Row, and I was doing some work in his office, and then out at his studio, and just sort of helping. I remember he had to add some modules onto his consoles, so I was, working on different things out there.
So you were breaking out the soldering iron too?
Not so much the soldering iron. I just had always liked to build things. So when I was in high school, I used to teach woodworking and built a sailboat one summer. So I was living in this little dive rooming house down on Music Row, and wanted to move into an apartment across the street that needed some work. And I worked out this deal with the landlord, and he said, yeah, if you can fix it up, you can live there for $60 a month or something like that. He didn't really think I'd do it, but I did. And he said, wow, this looks great. I've got this other friend that needs some steps fixed somewhere. So I started doing that, and then someone needed something done at a studio and or whatever. And so I was basically doing sort of carpentry type work and just general, not exactly soldering, but maybe close to that.
It's just a good reminder that it's not always the music skills that you need to start your career in music.
Yeah.
It's like the peripheral skills can get you, get a foot in the door too.
Yeah. But I was very fortunate because I remember doing some work on Chet Atkins at a studio, and I got to know some of the people, and it's just interesting to meet some people that are just way, way, way ahead of you in whatever industry you're in, and just learn from them and how they run their businesses and things like that.
So did you get a chance to record Chet Atkins yourself?
I eventually did in my studio. Yeah, he came. I was working for him at his place, and then 5 or 10 years later, he needed something done, so he called me up.
Right on, man.
He was those people, all of that, just extremely talented, and also of a generation which I think still exists in Nashville very much, but very much a gentleman. So was Owen. Ray Stevens is still rocking with his new club, and but just very, very good at what they did, and also I would think of them as highly ethical people. I'm trying to think what I did for. Yeah, Chet had something recorded. I had at that point, it was maybe around somewhere in the early 80s, I had a Tascam 8-track, an 80-8 machine, and he had done some live show and needed it mixed or something, and he came in, and the one thing I'll always remember is one of the tracks, I think it was the bass track, was cut way too hot. I mean, the via meter, the needle was just like vibrating on the peg over there, and I pulled the machine open and got my little plastic screwdriver out and started turning the pot down and got it sort of a manageable level. And I said, this is cut way too hot, but it doesn't really seem to be distorting. I think we're okay. And Chet was standing behind me. He said, I can't remember exactly what he said. He said, well, that's a simple linear waveform. And if it was a more complex waveform, like something from a hi-hat, it would have distorted, but since this is just a simple waveform, and I looked around and realized here's a guy that one of the best guitar players in the world, great business person, ran RCA Records for years, produced endless people, Elvis to all sorts of people, and he was someone who just knew every little aspect of recording, from the tiniest little thing to be able to say that to me about the technical stuff, all the way to, explaining the tuning of something to me. I remember another time he'd said that he was explaining how sometimes you would stretch the tuning on a piano because the bass needed to be slightly lower in order for your perception of this or that. So, I was fortunate to have people like that to aspire to, sort of learn how good they were.
Well, it's interesting to hear you talk about the tuning example. So for me, and maybe for you, like, I feel like I'm aware that tuning issue exists, but I can't explain it to you. I don't know it well enough. Yeah. And it's cool when you meet somebody who just knows all that stuff,
Yeah, it's interesting in a lot of fields how when you run into someone who's successful, what you might see on the surface, it's wonderful, but it's very often just the tip of the iceberg. They have a knowledge and talent and skill set that is way, way, way beyond that. I've noticed that with different, different artists that I would work with in my studio. Most of my work was actually with demo singers and people like that. But, sometimes people like Vince Gill or Chet or those people would come in, and Reba McEntire did some work with her. And what you hear on the radio is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, they are usually so good. It's just almost like magically good at what they do.
It's interesting to suggest that what breaks through the surface as popular music is sort of a tip of the iceberg of the mountain of talent that might go behind it.
Right.
For it to be, maybe that doesn't always apply to sort of a one-hit wonder situation. Right. But that probably certainly applies to somebody who repeatedly breaks through with popular music, Very cool, man. Did you get to record Chet Atkins' guitar ever? Did you put a mic on his guitar?
I probably did at that time. I can't really remember. I think I might have, or they may have just mixed what he had there.
Do you remember any anecdotes about how he liked to record his guitar, or any stuff you might have seen around there? He was finger picking a lot, right? Yeah. Finger picking a hollow body, kind of electric.
I think it was an acoustic, actually. I can't really remember, but right. I was around him a fair amount where he'd be playing. I was just amazed at how simple, how little his hands moved, and what magical music would come out of that guitar. Yeah, no doubt.
He's a guitarist worth studying if you want to learn how to play better guitar. I know Pat Bergeson is somebody who studied under him, right, and played with him for a long time. Have you known Pat for years?
No, I don't believe so. I think I got to know Chet through John Knowles.
Okay. And maybe Pat was learning with him after your time with Chet too. But he was in here once with one of Chet's old guitars, which he inherited. And I'll tell you, I was never so nervous trying to balance a microphone on one of my teetery old mic stands in front of that, that classical guitar. I did not want that to fall over. I don't want to be the one who put a ding in Chet Atkins' guitar. Right. You know what I mean?
It's funny. I know you often ask people for a quote, but one thing I remember hearing him say was that it's complicated to be simple. And he was talking about the process of being simple, and I've always kept that in mind with songwriting. You can be playing different instruments, whatever melodic lines in songs and everything in tracks, that it's complicated to be simple and unique. I mean, you can be unique, play a bunch of notes that don't make any sense. That's great. Or you can be simple and just go da, 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 da. But it's very difficult to have something that's simple and memorable plus unique enough to stick in people's minds. But
yeah, interesting. It's like the creators that make something iconic that is complex and simple, right? Or that is simple but complex underneath. Yeah. It ends up creating something that's iconic that sticks around forever. And then when somebody comes along and they're simple and it doesn't quite have it. It sounds derivative.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, let's see. All right. So you got a chance to work with all those guys. Tell us about Ray Stevens.
I didn't really work with Ray as much. He's just a brilliant musician, songwriter.
He's the streak.
Yeah, he had those records back then. He's in his own class. There's no one really like him, and he's still doing great. I mean, he's still got a place down on Music Row, right? Isn't that with the Camel Gates and all that? Yeah, I think he may have sold that or be in the process of selling that. And he has his new club, Cabaret, which is cabaret, I guess that's how you say it, but over out on Charlotte there, and I think he's packing them in out there. I went out there with his brother right before it opened, and everything was just done so incredibly well. He's just a perfectionist, and has the best people doing everything, the sound system, the design. I remember, and this is before it opened or anything, walking out on the stage area with his brother John, and just looking out, you could see every single seat in the house. There was no obstructions. Everything was just planned perfectly. And I know since then he's built his studio on the other side of the building. They were just constructing that at the time. But he had a great studio. Then he expanded it down on Grand Avenue where you're talking about. And I believe he recorded all his records there. The Streak, that whole era of things.
That's cool.
And he had some beautiful songs too, like his version of Misty, and he still does. He's just someone I admire.
That's right. That's awesome. This show is sponsored by Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can go to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level. And you can start right now with my free Introduction to Mixing course, Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is that these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you are in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything you can think of. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, or look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. All right, well, let me ask you one more question sort of about that time when you moved here in the 70s. That's when Robert Altman made the movie Nashville too, right?
Yeah, it was around that time, right.
Yeah, so give us a couple of anecdotes about what Nashville used to be like in the 70s. I think some details that I've heard of, Exit Inn, which is a big rock club, still exists, used to be a little tiny place. And that was the place you'd go see the new songwriters and stuff,
I used to go there all the time because it was the place. And the design was a little different. The entrance was around the back, and there was like a small bar there, and then you'd walk into the club. But kind of like downtown, kind of like Robert's Western Wear, right? You have the entrance in the back and Tootsie's and all that, or in the Ryman. It was actually, they had a small bar area that was not much bigger than your control room of your studio here, a little, maybe half again as big, and then you could go in there and have a drink, and then the person at the door would sort of let you into the actual club itself, which was smaller than it is now, but sort of a medium-sized nightclub type venue. But there were some great shows, and a lot of, I remember being there and seeing Billy Joel, who I'd heard, read about him in Rolling Stone. He was just sort of coming out and getting a seat up. I was sort of towards the front of the stage at one of the tables. It was early. There was maybe 8 or 10 people there, and him coming out and trying to get his bench adjusted and saying hello and stuff like that. It's just,
And this is sort of before he broke, or this is right about that time?
I think it was like right in he'd had Piano Man maybe or something. So,
that's wild, man.
But it was same thing. There was a place called Mother's Music Emporium out on near Fessler's Lane, where I remember meeting Bruce Springsteen out there. And I think he just, had just sort of broken, but not really that big. So either before or after the show, I remember he was out there playing pinball with, it was a Clarence Clemens, like a sax player who's maybe
I'm not sure.
Okay. But some of the other guys in the band, and I started talking with him. He said, "Oh yeah, you're a songwriter for," he said, I can't remember exactly what he said, but he was very, very extremely nice. And he said, "Come on back tomorrow night. I'll get you in for free." So I came back and said to the guy at the door, some giant biker type guy, "Excuse me, sir, but Bruce said that he would get me in tonight." And he said, "Yeah," or something. So I said, "Yes, sir. He said he would get me in. Could you ask somebody or something?" Yeah, or something. So he said somebody back there. Bruce just came right out to the front door and said, "Oh, come on, man."
That's hilarious.
But I mean, this is when, I haven't spoken or seen him since then, which is a bunch of years ago. But,
what a great story.
But, this is, just there's people that we know today playing in clubs, and 10, 20 years from now they'll be
in the green room, and we won't.
So
I guess my story, when you talk about Billy Joel, I remember seeing Ben Folds the very first year I moved here, and
so good.
He had a group called Jody's Power Bill. And he had a single out that was playing on the college radio here, WRVU, and it was over at 12th and Porter, and he was just up there playing with his band, and it was great power pop, and I was like, man, this guy is going to be awesome, And then I guess there was a bit of a moment of disappearing and transition, and then he reappeared as the Ben Folds 5, and it was all, it was all. Which way do you go, downhill or uphill? Or which is the good way to go from there?
Right.
It was all kicking butt from there.
But Nashville was a lot smaller then. But the Music Row was really the center of things. Berry Hill was just sort of beginning to happen. Although actually, I believe Creative Workshop was over there at the time.
Oh, okay.
Buzz Cason's place and that
Carl
whole area that had evolved into. Blackbird Carl, I had met Carl, and he had a small studio out at his place, and we used to, we'd share information or whatever, just because I think at one point we both had Fostek 16 tracks, and then he built his larger studio, Recording Arts, and
that's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, and he was actually at that point right near my place. I remember. Carl and I and a couple of other people lifting his big SSL into the studio when he bought it. So
wow,
great guy though, great friend for many years.
I wonder if there's that may be a bygone era where you put your friends' lives at risk for a moment, an afternoon, while you bring in the giant threateningly heavy console into the new studio. Now it's like, maybe you're going to help somebody carry in their computer, which is a little bit heavy, but not too bad.
Right.
So who knows? Maybe the era of gathering your friends together to carry your console and your tape machine. And I had to ask help from 5 of my friends to get my tape machine. And I needed to get it from downstairs in my house upstairs to where my control room was. So we put a bunch of wood slats down on the carpeted stairs, leaned the tape machine back, and then 5 of us just pushed and slid that thing up the stairs where if anybody lost their footing, they were dead, And thank you, Ken Coomer. I will always appreciate that. Now you came over and helped me out with that. So, yeah.
But
the commitment.
But in Nashville, it's changed a lot, but the inner workings of the music industry, I don't think they've changed that much, really. So, you still got the studios, and of course there's many more options as far as people recording now. But the publishing companies, the record companies, this and that. So
yeah, you still got all the people who just decide they want to dedicate their lives to making music.
Did you say throw your life away? Or no, I'm just kidding. No. But it was really an exciting time musically back then. Chris Christopherson had sort of broken through these unbelievably beautiful poetic songs, and Shel Silverstein was writing these great things, and Billy Sherrill was making these great records, and all just I know I'm forgetting a lot of things here, but it was just a real. And shortly after that, Waylon Jennings and that whole outlaw thing was happening. So it was a real, and Willie Nelson, real incredibly creative time. I think sort of things it really changed a lot.
I get the impression Nashville felt like a place where there were no velvet ropes. You could just walk in and say hi to whoever, and you were all eating and drinking beer and coffee at the same table when you took a break, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it was that was sort of true. Yeah,
like an open.
I just remember back then just bringing songs around to people, just sort of walk in and talk to the secretary, see if you could leave a tape with somebody, or just randomly meeting people sometimes. But actually, I think you can still do that now. So, to a degree, but it just, but it was a lot smaller then, and as I said, you could speak to the secretary without the armed guard and the metal detector first.
Well, yeah, exactly. So Music Row, for example, has that little dive bar, Bobby's Idle Hour, which has been there for ages, right? And what's the history with that? Was that people would finish the session and they would... Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
There was a place called the Country Corner, which was actually... It was another dive bar, which was a little further down there on 16th to the left. And then just before you got there was the original Idle Hour, which was, I can't remember if it was a trailer or a bus that just wouldn't go any further, and they just left it on the lot there. But
start serving beer.
It pretty much what it was. I remember out and back there'd be cars, that were just shot up with bullet holes and things like that. I think it might have been sort of a diner car or something like that, maybe from a train or something that they just sort of plopped there. And that was pretty much of a dive bar. And across there, I think it was the Country Corner. It was a little more popular, but still very much of a dive bar. And
so why do we bring that up? I mean,
I'm not sure.
Well, my thought was that I heard stories that like people would finish sessions in the studio and they'd go just take the break there. And so you'd see, you'd be sitting next to songwriters and session musicians and music stars all just having a beer together.
And you can still do it at Losers, though.
Okay, where's that?
Well, Losers is down on Broadway there in Midtown, so it's...
I should know where Losers is, because...
Well, it's sort of a more modern bar, but it's not super fancy. It's wonderful, actually. It's owned by Irv Woolsey and Steve. And I'm sure there's several partners in there, whatever. But they built it, and it became so popular, they had to expand out. So they built a place next door called Winners.
Nice.
And now they've built up. But you go in there on any afternoon or night, there's no telling who you might run into if that's what you want to do, So
right on.
People are over there, and
well, let's talk more about what you mentioned a moment ago. That walking in and taking a tape in and hoping it gets listened. Talk about your experience of writing songs then, and what was your intention to write songs back then, and what were you trying? What did you feel like you were trying to do?
I'd always liked writing, and I was an English major in college, but I really loved music. I finished college, but that was not my main. I really just wanted to do music, so I grew up in Connecticut, not too far from New York. I visited Los Angeles, and I hitchhiked to Nashville on one of my school breaks, and just decided I liked Nashville. And I'd always, had little bands and stuff when I was going through college. We'd play on weekends, but I just wanted to really decided I wanted to focus more on songwriting. So I came down here, and there were little publisher offices up and down Music Row, and I'd go in and bring songs and had stuff with a number of the publishers, and did a lot of work with Mel Tillis's company, Sawgrass Music, and had some stuff published by Peer Music, different things, and so they were there. It's not that much different now. I think the access is probably there's just so many people trying to do it now. I don't know if you can just be walking in, but you can meet the people, and you can. There's some great organizations here, like the Nashville Songwriters Association and all that. And other organizations, too, that can offer an interface with the different publishers and get to meet people. So,
if you would, talk for a moment about why there's a need for songwriters then, now. What if you write a song, where does it go from there?
In terms of what?
Well, if I write a song for myself to sing, I'm going to go sing it on a stage. If you come to Nashville and you write a song and you present it to somebody else, what happens to it after that? Yeah, I'm asking you to explain some of the basics of that.
Okay. So if you write a song and say an artist records it or whatever, then when it comes out, you will be paid for the sales of the whatever copies you sell, plus you would be paid for the airplay from ASCAP BMI or CSAC. There's a few other organizations now,
Where, again, more dumb questions, but who does the paying to the songwriter for some of those opportunities?
Well, you would be paid directly from your performance rights organization, ASCAP, BMI, or CSAC. And then Irving Azoff has, I think it's Global Rights Management now, too, the number of people who've moved over to. And the ownership and income of a song has traditionally been divided in half between the songwriter and the publisher. So traditionally, the way it works is that a songwriter would work through a publisher who would help get the song recorded. They would collect the money and pay the writer their half. That's an oversimplification, but that's the traditional way that it is sort of worked in the
and
past.
That income would come from radio play, record sales,
right.
Sync license in a movie.
Exactly.
Things like that. And then now, of course, that's expanded to, since media is just vast and ubiquitous, it's like song streaming, it's video use, it's YouTube views, it's everything you can think of, Spotify listens.
Right. It's much more complex, but it's the same similar thing of performance income and what they would call mechanical income, because a mechanical income would be thought of as your music translated to some sort of a medium by mechanical means. So say, a vinyl LP would be a mechanical medium or cassette, CD, something like that. So now with streaming, there is still a small amount of mechanical income, but some of the streaming income is considered mechanical income. And just for example, the Harry Fox agency has represented my company and many companies for many, many years. And they will issue a license to the record company, and they will collect the mechanical income, and they pay my company. And in my case, I pay myself as a songwriter. So traditionally, the publisher would get the money from Harry Fox or direct licensing, and they would pay their writers their portion. In many cases, songwriters that are known as staff writers would be on a draw with the publisher. So the publisher, have a great publisher here and a great songwriter. The publisher would believe in the songwriter and give them so many $100 a week to be able to write full time. And then when a song got recorded or when songs got recorded, the publisher would have to recoup against that money that was advanced to the songwriter. And once it was recouped, then they would be paying them directly their royalties.
That's cool. So I know that it gets confusing for people sometimes when they first hear about this songwriter, these shares, but really it's it's as simple as this. You write a song, and then if you're the creative songwriter, you probably need some help with the marketing and the admin of making this song go and have a life and collect the money. And you're just expanding your team by working with the publisher and splitting the proceeds. And of course, the publishing companies were the ones that were sort of, entrenched in the business and had the funds and everything to simply, get you on your feet as a songwriter.
And the contacts too, I would say.
Yeah.
The publishing company might have a relationship with the different artists or whatever. I mean, that's an oversimplification, but it's 100% true. I mean, that is the way it basically is. And it's really not all that complicated. I mean, if you write a song, you write it yourself, you own 100% of the royalties. And if someone sells a copy of that, according to federal law, you have to be paid, I think it's 9.5 cents now or something. But there's if you heard of the Music Modernization Act that has recently been passed.
I've heard wind of it, but if you could elaborate, that'd be great.
Yeah, it's because of all the changes that you mentioned, Lidge. This is something which is fairly complex, but it's just a way to sort of modernize the collection of everything and figure out a way to encompass all of these different royalty streams. And there's many, many thanks need to go to Bart Herbison here in Nashville, who runs the Nashville Songwriters Association, and David Israelite, who runs the National Music Publishers Association, and I've been a member of both of those for many, many years. And they sort of partnered, or actually, it's just a group effort of all the songwriters and record companies and everyone just trying to get together to figure out a way to deal with these new complex forms and pay people in a fairer way.
Well, hopefully it'll get really simple at some point. I don't know.
I think it's on the way there, yeah.
I've heard intriguing things suggested in the blockchain space, which is, part of the world of Bitcoin. And I'll put out this idea. Imagine a world one day where you record a song, and instead of creating, a WAV file to upload to the internet, you create some dot whatever,
Right.
I think a company I heard this suggested from was Blockchain Music or something file. And then it gets uploaded, and then when it gets sold, that's tracked without even needing somebody in the middle of that. If it gets streamed, that's tracked, and you're earning your income without having somebody in the middle.
Right.
If it got sampled and used in a film, it's just automatically, tracked back to you. That kind of stuff would be pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I hopefully that's coming. I mean, it's gotten better with that in the last few years, but songs now have an identifying number, ISWC code, and also individual recordings have an ISRC code, which is embedded. So there is a way to keep track of those things. And although for example, it seems that one performance right agency has a different way of writing the ISWC code with dashes and dots, and the other won't accept it that way, and the Harry Fox wants it. So everybody's just slowly coming together, and what do they say? It's like herding cats.
Right.
So, but because everyone does have their own special interest, but I really would have to applaud David Israelite at the NMPA. It represents the publishers, and actually they started the Harry Fox agency, or one was an offshoot of the other. I can't remember, although now Harry Fox is a separate entity. But he's really, even though they represent the publishers, has brought in, songwriters and does a lot of great stuff on behalf of songwriters, and works closely with Bart Herbison at Nashville Songwriters Association. And, I think it's just great to see that everybody, trying to, I don't know how to put it. When I'm speaking with people, a lot of times rather than look for differences, I say, what do we have in common? How can we work together on this? So I think they very much have an attitude towards that of moving forward together.
Well, it's one of the benefits of organizations getting together and trying to figure out a common language in an industry. I mean, it's because of that, and I think it's Audio Engineering Society is why we have, .wav files, .mp3s that are file formats that everybody can understand and press record to and press play. If we didn't have that,
paper or whatever.
Yeah, if we didn't have that, I'd record a digital file of my music and hand it to you, and you wouldn't even know what to do with it. You wouldn't have any way to play it,
Right. That's true.
All right, cool. Well, let's spin back a little bit to the songwriting process. What for you is part of your process in songwriting? And maybe a way to start that is there a routine in your day, for example, that helps you with your creativity? Do you start out your mornings a certain way, or your evenings or afternoons or anything?
I tend to work at it a lot. So my theory is that when inspiration strikes, I'll have a better chance of getting a song written if I happen to have a guitar in my hand than if I don't. But as far as routine, I do a lot of co-writing, although I try to do some writing on my own as well, and definitely do that. But I mentioned the function of a music publisher and things like that, and I think several times I used the word theoretically. I mean, theoretically, the publisher will get your song recorded. In many cases nowadays, so many people write, so many artists write that it's, I think songwriters do a lot of co-writing, and the hope of writing great songs and the hope that the artist might record that. So, but it's something I really enjoy quite a bit because I enjoyed and still do enjoy engineering. I like the idea of working with an artist or something and having sort of discovering their vision and bringing it to life and coming out with something that represents them. Although sometimes it just, there's no real predicting it. So,
yeah.
But the process, let me see. You mean like nuts and bolts? What it's like?
Yeah, and I guess it's a loaded question because it does. It merits the question: am I writing a song by myself or am I co-writing with somebody? Because those are different experiences, I imagine.
Yeah, I'd say generally in both cases, basically, I or we are just trying to do the best thing that we possibly can. So, but as far as the actual process for me, it very often starts with trying to find a good idea or a title. And I often will sort of, I'm constantly thinking about things, making notes on my phone. And then when I sit down, sometimes an idea just takes over. I just have to drop everything and sit down at a piano and go for it with that idea. But in many cases, I'll have notes of different ideas. When I sit down to write, I'll be looking through those. Or if I'm co-writing, say one of the people I'm working with mentions a particular title. The reason I think that is I feel that if you can start out with a great idea or a great title that's unique, then you are way, way, way ahead of the game. And say, I'll just mention a few songs that, I think of Ariana Grande, Thank You Next, monster hit, Sam Hunt, Body Like a Back Road. It's not which Body Like a Back Road. There's only one of them. There's only one Thank You Next. White Christmas. There's only one White Christmas. You can go through, think of some of your favorite songs. Yesterday, the Beatles. So if you can come up with a unique title, Cruise is another, one word title, just there's Florida Georgia Line, just nothing else like it. Achy Breaky Heart, that's another one. So if you can come up with a unique title that might have those qualities, then you might have I think a better chance of coming up with something that might be successful or good. So, and you still have to write the song. Right.
Well, so it's like, it's sort of like title first, so that you've got this unique title, and then it's, this title represents what about the chorus line or something like that, maybe?
Actually,
where do you go next?
Where I would go next after coming up with a title, the first thing I do is to look it up on Spotify or Google it and see if there's another title. And I've had something I thought was a good title, and damn, that's Blake Shelton's new single. So someone thought of it first. So, I heard John Mayer interviewed recently by Bobby Bones, and he said that's the first thing he does. He said, what was this song? I Still Feel Like Your Man. He said it was the title song of his last album. He said, I had this idea, and the first thing I did was Google it. I couldn't believe no one had written that. And then I went into a trance for 3 days trying to write it. But it's a great interview, actually. It's on YouTube. But that's what I'll do usually after that. And if you're very, very lucky, maybe it hasn't been done, or maybe there might be some obscure song that didn't do well, or something in a radically different genre than what I'm working in now. If I'm working with a country artist and this is a 12-year-old hip hop song that didn't really get played that much, and you look at the lyrics and every other word's a swear word, well, you might be okay moving forward.
Let's look at Jill Sobule and
what a great talent she is, and Robin Eaton. I know you guys have worked a lot together. So
yeah, and then come on, Liz, names come to
Brad.
You now. No, but who am I thinking of? So Jill did I Kissed a Girl, and then 10 years later,
right? Katy Perry was it?
Katy Perry.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry.
So
I think it's what I think is funny about remembering names live on a podcast. the more obvious it is and the more like
Right.
I'm a dummy if I can't think of it immediately, the more likely it's going to be hard to remember it.
Yeah. So that would bring me to probably one of the most important things I could say is that there's no rules in songwriting.
Yeah.
So, but if you would like to increase your odds, I would say that's
A good way to start.
I try to do that or something like that.
Yeah.
So, but there are absolutely no rules like that. But that was a wonderful song that
Robin
did
and Brad
Robin
produced,
co-write that, and he produced it too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then so I think sort of broke her.
It introduced me to Robin and Brad and Alex
Yeah.
the Great and Jill Sobule.
And they had that video. Was Fabio in that?
Yeah,
the
Fabio
model
was,
guy.
was the model in the video,
Yeah,
which was
okay, so
very
it's just
colorful
great.
and cartoony looking,
Yeah. So
And then a decade later, and Katy Perry's
Yeah.
has like a worldwide smash
right.
out of it. I mean, Jill's version, her original "I Kissed a Girl"
Right.
was popular
Yeah.
for at her level, of where they were coming from, but it wasn't like
Right.
not everybody heard of it.
Right. So from there, it's just sometimes a title will tell you what the song is about right there.
That's what it
And
sounds
then-
like to me. I don't mean to interrupt, but just the
Yeah.
thought of like if you were going to build furniture, I mean,
Right.
you're a carpenter. You need to have a measurement or a benchmark.
Yeah.
You begin with something that you can keep going back to and make sure you're true to where you're starting, and everything goes from there. And I imagine the title feels a bit like that.
A bit. Yeah, it definitely does. And then it's a little tricky to describe, but sometimes if you can have a title that has a little bit of a twist or unexpected quality to it, it's good to have, but put a little thought into it and just to see where might be the most what you might feel or the people you're working with the best way to go. And one of I mentioned these sort of classic songs, but Use Somebody with who was the band?
Somebody. It'll come to me in a minute.
Okay, all right. So
I definitely know who that is.
Yeah, I can't believe that. I can't because it was such a great record. But if I saw a title that said Use Somebody, it might not really resonate immediately emotionally with me, where I would say that's not a very nice thing to say, to use somebody. But then when they twist it around to I could use somebody, and it's incredibly heartfelt, lonesome, beautiful, beautiful song, that's what makes a classic record there. Once again, Use Somebody. There's only one of them, and we can't think of the band.
But we will in just a moment when we come back for the
yeah.
jam session.
Okay.
Rockstars will be back in just a minute for the jam session. We'll have the name. Okay. And reminder that we'll have links to stuff we're talking about here with Steve in the podcast show notes. If you're on your mobile device, just click through. Or if you're on your computer, just go to rsrockstars.com, find the blog post right there, including a YouTube playlist with some links to the great work that Steve has done. And we'll have links to his book as well and other writings. So we'll see you guys in just a minute for the jam session. Are you using a Mac in your recording studio? Are you tired of feeling like the studio setup you worked so hard to create is becoming obsolete too quickly? Wouldn't it feel great to have a trusted friend to help you keep your existing Mac and studio setup current and relevant so that you can focus on the thing you love most, which is making great music? Well, now you can rely on OWC, Otherworld Computing, which you can find at OWC.com, whose mission it is to help you get the most mileage out of your existing Mac. Whether you need to upgrade your RAM, install an SSD drive, add more connectivity, or simply find a great used Mac that's ready to rock, OWC will help take your studio far into the future with a vast library of DIY install videos, 24/7 friendly support, and free shipping in the US on most items over $49. Why get frustrated and ditch your existing computer when you can take your studio far into the future with OWC? Learn more at OWC.com and find out how awesome your Mac can be at OWC. If you want to capture every nuance of a great performance in your studio, then you need to start with a microphone that is crafted with great care and attention to detail. JZ Mics in Riga, Latvia designs amazing sounding microphones that are handcrafted with jeweler's precision to bring you incredible detail in your recordings. At the heart of JZ microphones is the unique Golden Drop capsule design, which uses a lighter, faster diaphragm that delivers great clarity and fidelity while avoiding distracting colorations and distortions. Make sure to check out the Vintage Series V67 and V11 with Class A discrete amplifier circuitry, extremely low self-noise, and advanced built-in shock mount technology to bring a classic, expensive vintage sound to your studio for an affordable price. JZ offers a 5-year warranty, free shipping to the US, and a 30-day money-back guarantee. Plus, for the next 2 weeks, you can get 50% off any mic at JZ Microphones during their summer sale. I got one. You're hearing my voice right now on the V67. Wouldn't it feel great to have one of these in your studio? Go to jzmic.com or click the link in the show notes below. Hey Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Steve O'Brien, joining us here in the studio to talk about songwriting, Nashville, and we're going to start out with the answer to the question we left with just before this question. Are you ready to jam, Steve?
All right, Kings of Leon.
Yeah, Kings of Leon. You know, it's funny because when we were remembering, I was like, Royal Kings, Lord, and then a moment later, it was like, of course, it's Kings of Leon. And it's even one of my old friends from Murfreesboro, Brent Rawlings, who's done the sound and recording with those guys for decades now. Wow. So yeah, it's definitely close to home. Wonderful. So Steve, let me ask you this question, talking about songwriting and the process. Do you think that, I mean, we're kind of answering it by answering some of these questions, but do you feel like songwriting is something that can be taught or learned?
You know, I have a interesting answer to that. I would say no. You cannot learn how to write songs, but you can learn an awful lot about it. So I think that first inspiration or whatever it takes to make something special, I think that just has to come out of you. And if you have that ability, as you know, when you're picking up a guitar when you're a kid or whatever, I think you can develop that, and I think you can learn about it. I always think about Yesterday, the Beatles songs, which Paul McCartney and John Lennon wrote when they were 17, and they didn't know how to read or write music or anything like that. I think the original title was even Scrambled Eggs, and they ended up changing it. And Paul especially went on to learn how to, much music theory, orchestration, things like that. And he and John, and then Paul separately, afterwards had just enormous success, but they never had a song that was as big as Yesterday, which they wrote when they didn't know what they were doing. So I think as any kind of advice I would have to people starting out is, if you do something and you like it and you think it's good, it might be good.
Yeah. I think hearing you talk about what can be learned and what just needs to come from a moment of inspiration.
Yeah.
I think that the moment of inspiration is that moment when you're fascinated by something.
Right.
And it feels like you just discovered something, you know, like if I hear a line that seems like a good title or part of a chorus, I feel like I just discovered it and I stumbled into it. Sometimes the thing, and I claim make no claim to great songwriting, but I have experienced some of the process along the way. And sometimes that moment of discovery might not be a very fantastic lyric, but maybe it was just that I let loose when I was singing it. That felt like a moment of discovery, That brings me to another thing, and sort of continuing your question before of what I might do if I had an idea or whatever, is once you have that, the melody, the initial sort of oomph of or impetus, whatever, of the melody very often seems to come pretty quickly. And I remember I knew Shel Silverstein a little bit many, many years ago, back in those days that you were talking about. And a friend of mine was working with him. Can't remember who it was. I produced a couple of albums on a great songwriter named Fred Kohler, who
and some of Shell's songs he co-written. It might have been Fred. But in any case, they were writing, and I think Shell had a hotel room at the Holiday Inn Vanderbilt, and they had this idea, and then one of them said, "Where's Shell?" And he was over like on the bed, sort of rolling on the bed, grunting and groaning, and they thought he was having a fit or something, and it wasn't. He was just saying the title over and over and over again until he could develop a melody out of it.
Right.
And
nice.
And some of the very, very best songs just have this inevitability about it. I fall to pieces, I fall to pieces. I mean, it just sounds exactly like you would say it. Another one is White Christmas. I'm dreaming of a white Christmas.
It's interesting. Both of those melodies go up in the end.
Yeah, yeah.
So like I fall to pieces,
Yeah.
sort of, it's almost like the contrast of the melody.
Right.
If it was falling, it would have come down.
Well, here's one that goes down, though. This is an old song. I think Engelbert Humperdinck or something, but Eddie Miller wrote this. Was the old classic "Release Me." It's "Please release me, let me go." I mean, but it just sounds exactly like you would say it. So, that's something. Some of the songwriters, especially in Nashville, these people are just geniuses. And, going back to what Chet had said, it's complicated to be simple. I mean, it will sound so simple, but so conversational. And sometimes there's an enormous amount of work and time that goes into making that.
Well, it's a cool story hearing about Shell, singing that lyric over and over again until you find it. It's that thing that I felt like they were trying to teach me when I was in architecture school, which is you need to do a whole bunch of the wrong designs before you arrive at the right one.
Yeah.
Although that's not always true, because that moment of inspiration, sometimes the right one just comes quickly.
It does, like yesterday. But I'm often amazed at people who you run into them, they're a good songwriter, whatever. They seem sort of low key, and then you start talking to them, and they have this wealth of knowledge you had just no idea. I think when I'd met Shell, I was probably 22 or something, and I'd visited Key West, and Ernest Hemingway had a house there, and I had seen that museum with all the cats and everything. And Shell, I knew had a place there, so I was chatting with him or something, and I said, "So, have you been to Ernest?" "Oh yeah." I said, "Have you read many of his books?" And he looked at me like I was from Mars or something. He said, "Well, everything he's ever written." I mean, so, it's just interesting how knowledgeable some people are.
So introduce us to who Shel Silverstein is.
Oh, Shel, well, he passed away a few years ago. He was a brilliant, I guess, creative person, you'd have to say. He wrote, he was an incredible cartoonist. In fact, he was the staff cartoonist for Playboy magazine.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He also wrote these beautiful children's books like The Giving Tree. And then
Where the Sidewalk Ends.
Yeah, exactly. And then he wrote some unbelievable songs like Boy Named Sue.
I didn't know he wrote that one.
Yeah, he sure did. With the Unicorn, what was that band? The Irish Rovers.
Yeah.
A Queen of the Silver Dollar for Emmylou Harris, I think it was. But he was a real interesting
They used to play, it was like The Great Smoke Off or something was on the Dr. Demento show. They would play one of his songs.
Yeah.
It was about a couple of guys on a baseball field just like rolling joints and smoking until one of them couldn't take it anymore.
So that's interesting. But going along with what we said earlier about songwriting being learned, I guess I'm contradicting myself because I just constantly try to learn about it all the time, and everybody else I know that's any good is obsessed with it.
Maybe you can learn it, but you'll never get the answer.
Yeah, and so many times I or some friends of mine have written something we really love and think is a great song and try to, the next day you're sitting there with a blank piece of paper and, well, how the heck did I ever do that? Because you can't write that one again. You have to write another song. But one fascinating thing to me with songwriting is how it's related to being a musician, but being a musician is actually quite separate from being a songwriter. And a number of the really great songwriters I've been around are not great musicians. Harlan Howard who wrote I Fall to Pieces, for example, and many other classic country songs. He had a birthday party one time, sort of a block party on Music Row, and they gave him as a present a guitar with 3 frets on it, because he wrote all those great songs just strumming along and, half a dozen chords or so. Irving Berlin, possibly, maybe America's greatest songwriter. White Christmas is an example. But he could only play piano in one key, F sharp. He just played on the black keys. And when he made some money, he got a piano with a crank on the side that would move the insides back and forth.
Oh, that's
like
hilarious.
A capo on a guitar. But, some of those melodies, using White Christmas again, it's like, 5 half tones apart? Da, 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 da. It doesn't sound like anything else in the world.
Yeah.
Interesting. But I've known a number of, there's songwriters that are just, virtuoso musicians too. But just because you're not a great musician doesn't mean you can't be a great songwriter.
So what about the experience of, there are things about instruments or melody writing that you're quite good at and quite comfortable in? And then do you sometimes want to just like kick your own ass and get yourself out of that comfort zone?
Absolutely.
And stumble into new discovery? And how do you do that? How do you like to do that?
I'm headed over to Guitar Center now. I think I need a new guitar. No, no, I'm just kidding. Bob Dylan used to say there's only so many songs in each guitar. That's how he'd end up with so many of them. But it is interesting. You sit down at a different piano or pick up a different guitar or something like that, and you come up with something different. I'm constantly trying to throw myself off a little bit and get out of the
Makes sense
zone.
that human voices are all different and different songs come out of different humans, so why not instruments too?
I think you can get trapped into writing to a different instrument, but if you're working on a melody, it's very helpful to stay away from an instrument and just try to come up with the melody in your head and then later harmonize it, come up with the chords. And sometimes it's really surprising what you end up with. There's one of the interesting things, I wouldn't want to call it a rule, but there's different things that you can sort of learn. But one of them is, I remember being called the one-finger test. So if you're working on a melody and you think it sounds pretty good, maybe sit down at a piano and try playing it with one finger without just a bunch of banging chords and seeing if you really have a good melody.
That's I like that, the one-finger test.
Yeah.
I'm going to try that on everything. Try that on a guitar. Don't play the chords behind it. Just play that one note.
Yeah, it's interesting,
maybe that goes for the vocal melody too. It's like put your guitar down and just sing the melody.
What I'm speaking of the vocal melody, just the melody to the song. But you listen to, Thank You Next. All these, they really hold up well to that.
What should I ask you about now? You mentioned when you were just we were riffing on topics, you talk about the psychological aspects of songwriting. What does that mean to you?
It's interesting. I think you invited me to do the interview. I was driving to a songwriting appointment, and I can't remember what I said, but I think I used the term tritophrenic. Did I?
Tritophrenic.
Or something. But I was...
like schizophrenic, or is that like a spin on that?
I think it's having at least 2 personalities.
Right.
So, there's a really interesting book. I don't know if it's still in print, but for aspiring writers, it was very helpful to me, I remember years ago, called Becoming a Writer by the woman's name was Dorothea Brande, Brande. And she talks about some of that. I think you have to be, how should I describe it? You have to be a bit of a warrior. You just have to, you're on this mission and you can't really, no one really understands what you're doing. And you have to sort of figure out your own way to do that. So
it would seem like also your biggest wins are completely private until it's a hit song.
Yeah, and that's but then you keep going past that, So the 2 big wins I feel are writing something that I love, which is not easy to do, but if I come up with something I'm really pleased with it, I just get an incredible thrill. And then the other part of hearing it on the radio or, having it gets recorded, that's like, the other part of it. But speaking psychologically, it's something I do think about, that there is, it's like when I say schizophrenic, I mean, you've got you who is the person we're talking to right now. And then there's like this little person inside you that is not very logical. It's the one that adds up 2 and 2 and comes up with 17, but somehow you run it through a calculator and it works. It adds up perfectly. So how did that happen? You don't know. And then there's the other part that is sort of the critic inside you.
Yeah.
So I found that sometimes I'll get an idea for something and I'll send it off to the little kid in there, the creative guy, and hope he comes up with something. And then sometimes working on something, you have the critic sort of poking, that's not good enough, that's not good enough. Well, sometimes you need to sort of kick the critic aside and finish the song or do whatever, and then you can come back another day and let the critic...
Yeah, just give the critic a 20 and send him down to the idle hour.
Yeah, exactly. And then, there'll be plenty of time for the critic later. So, but I've noticed sometimes there's been times where it's been really, really important to me to finish a song. I mean, I might need to for a certain reason or something. And if you work too hard at something, you sort of get into this black hole that you can't figure it out. And then, but if you sort of delicately, don't work too hard at it, but let it float out there, sometimes you can just be riding your bicycle later and it'll pop into your mind, or having a beer at Losers.
I've solved third verses by going on walks.
Yeah, stuff like that.
I find that's a good place because it's like totally out of that blank page zone.
Yeah.
One of my first third verse walks, of course, ended up, drawing from references like the shadowy moon, which I've looked up and there it was, you know. So I don't know how many third verses I want to be literally about the walk I'm on, but
right.
Something about that is there's an escape when you just get out.
Yeah.
I feel like in the car, it's almost pretty good, but I've taken jam recordings or instrumental stuff that I'm like, oh, I'm feeling something on it, and I've tried to sing over the top of it in the car, but I can't ever really get too much of anywhere that way for some reason.
Really? Yeah.
Maybe the car is just maybe you just have too much of your life at stake when you're driving.
Right. I get a lot of ideas driving, though. I think a lot of people do too. It's just the monotonous of a repetitive action, sort of like Thoreau used to say he would chop wood out by his pond or something, and ideas would sort of come. In fact, that's something that, I can't believe I remember this, it's been 20, 30 years ago, but that Dorothea Brand book, they would speak in there about if you, just to try to organize your life to be able to do your writing. And then if you need to get a job, which, you often do, don't get something that taxes the same part of your brain that is doing the writing. In other words, something I remember, like a rural mail route driver or something was something she suggested. But, so like it
leaves your creative brain free to wander.
Right. I mean, if you're a talented writer and you get a job, a high-powered job, making a lot of money for an advertising agency, your energy is going to go there. On the other hand, if you're waking up and writing songs in the morning, but maybe driving Uber or Lyft in the afternoons on your own terms when you want to, meeting interesting people, seeing sunsets, seeing, what else? Drunken bachelorette parties. But I mean, you're just getting input into your mind there. And it's not stressing you. Not stressing that part.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've also noticed that sometimes if I've done a session that's very intense, some days I finish a long session in the day, in the studio with a band, with an artist, working really hard. And then afterwards, I'm like, I just want to pick up my guitar and compose something. I'm very inspired. And then others, maybe I don't.
Yeah.
And I guess I need to take a second look at what was the difference between those sessions, Maybe one was music that inspired me. Maybe one wasn't,
Right. That's interesting. When I was doing sessions all the time, I would try to wake up early in the morning before I had other people's songs running through my mind, and work for a couple of hours.
Yeah, talk about your morning routine. How important is that?
That probably gets into another piece of advice for the rock stars, I would say, is that I'll usually wake up and I'll be checking my email, having a few cups of coffee, and say if I have a writing appointment, I'll go through some ideas for that. Especially if it's someone that I haven't worked with before, I always try to do some research, and I would do that when I had the studio too. If you go in and sit down with a new artist, and you bring up some cut number 3 on their second album 8 years ago or something that you love, which you really love, it just gets things off on a good foot, but just to learn what you might be doing, whatever. And then I'll very often go to some sort of a writing appointment and work as I did today. I was down on Music Row working this morning with a super talented guy named David Tucker from Kentucky I've been writing with. That's pretty much it. Then, if I'm not actually writing, or today I'm doing this interview with you, and then I've got a meeting this evening with the Recording Academy. But I'll often be in my studio. If I wasn't doing that, I might be in my studio working on a track, that I was working on, or a demo of something that I'd done with another writer or something like that.
Did you ever get into the kind of morning pages routine, or special creative writing ritual first thing of the day, or any of that stuff?
I hadn't actually do that. I sort of, but I've tried that. I've definitely tried that. In fact, when I was doing my studio, sometimes I'd force myself to write a song every morning, even in a couple of hours, just to, and I wrote a lot of horrible stuff, but if it might be something good, but it might just be about a bug that was walking across the floor or something. If you've got 20 minutes left and you've got to write something, but I promise you, if you do that every day for 5 or 6 days, you'll come up with something. Now, it might just be a line or something like that.
I like that idea. I like that idea, and I like that, forcing yourself to create something and kind of get through it in an hour or 2 hours or whatever it is.
Something, yeah.
How important is it that it's a complete song?
Back then I would, just do something to get it done. It would have a verse, a chorus, and another verse or something like that. And I would put it in my cassette recorder. But I can't tell you the number of times I've been working on something that seemed like it was sort of okay. It was enough to finish, and then all of a sudden some line happens that the most memorable time I can think is a song that John Michael Montgomery recorded that I wrote with Richard Fagan. And Richard passed away a few years ago. He's just a fantastic writer, really good friend of mine. It was really sad, but he had a lot of tattoos. And this was before tattoos were all that popular, but he had like a big iguana on the side of each leg. I remember he was covered with tattoos, but it was during the summertime, and I'd seen this new iguana on his other leg. And I said, what's that? And he said, well, I can't remember if his sister, just something had happened with his sister, and it was sort of a crisis to him. And he said, I did that to externalize the pain. So I said, well, that sounds like could be a song, Externalize the Pain. And he said, yeah. I said, you want to try to get together? We could try to write that. So we got together, we worked for an hour or two, and we were writing this song about this redneck guy that just broke up with his wife or girlfriend, and he was at this bar, and he got into a couple of fights and then got kicked out, and he was in his beat-up pickup truck in the back, backing into other cars like a demolition derby or something. And I remember turning to Rich and I said, man, this guy's a real paint-the-town redneck, isn't he? And Rich looked at me, and I looked at him. Neither one of us said for a minute anything for a minute. He said, yeah, let's just not worry about that other song, right? Paint the Town Redneck, which we did, which was recorded by John Michael Montgomery.
That's great, man. Great.
But and it was a platinum album, I think. But it wouldn't have happened if we weren't there,
right?
And we weren't sort of working on something. So
you were in work mode. You were present and ready the moment it happened.
Right, right. So when you're talking about a daily routine, that's something that I would, and I love the morning pages idea. Just, whatever, if you can, and maybe I'm speaking to the rock stars now, but I mean, if you can somehow organize your life to do that, imagine Taylor Swift or something like that, John Mayer. I don't know these people, but, I've met them, but, I imagine this morning, Taylor and John, they probably both woke up, were thinking about songs. They might have picked up a guitar, did something, and then they had maybe a couple of calls to their manager trying to get their schedule straightened out, which you and I did. But and they might, be interviewed, this afternoon, and they might be doing something, playing at a show tonight or something.
Yeah.
It's not that much different than, what my life might be like, or if you're, in maybe the earlier stages, being an aspiring songwriter, waking up, working on your music, maybe calling to book a gig, getting out there and going to your job for a few hours. And the big difference is those people are making a lot more money.
Right.
But if you can organize your life to be like that, you're going to be doing it, you're going to be getting better at it, and you're going to be more ready to be ready when the lightning strikes, in the right place at the right time. You're going to have the goods, because lightning will strike. I mean, you're going to be in that situation where someone's looking for a song, or they're looking for an engineer, looking for a guitar player or something. If you've got the goods, then you've got a shot.
Well, I think that we're going to be doing something with our day. And, the way that you start out your day can have a trickle-down effect on the rest of your day for sure.
Uh-huh.
And if you're focused on, one thing, maybe that trickles down on your day. If you're focused on some version of creative, enlightenment, maybe that helps.
Uh-huh.
I also think about an analogy of like exercise. I mean, if you're like, I'm going to get in great shape, I'm going to exercise more, and you go look around you, you're going to get like 100 different versions of what you should be doing, know? And you can't do them all. And you maybe can't do exactly what one person's suggestion is anyway, because it's not yours.
Right.
But what you can do is you can explore it and then take away what works for you. I mean, to continue with that analogy, different running or lifting weights or something like that. Or if I've tried different diets and then I'm like, well, I didn't really like that diet, but I sure do like eating apples and almonds. Take that away with you, And I think with your creative morning thing, it could be that, maybe you try, somebody says morning pages, or they say object writing.
Right.
And you just try that for a minute. Maybe you don't do that exact thing forever, but you take away your personalized version of it and continue it. And probably whatever you do, if you don't do anything at all, well, then probably that influences the rest of your day. And you probably aren't as creative if you aren't doing something creative first thing in the day.
Possibly, yeah. I think to be an artist, that's too big of a word here, but you have a great opportunity to wake up and do what you love to do. So you should just do that, whether it's the morning pages or the apples or but I mean, as I was saying, if you can sort of organize your life to be doing that, you're doing what you want to do. If you get run over by a truck tomorrow, you spent today, not living someone else's life, or doing something that you don't want to do. Point. And if you keep doing that, the odds of being successful just keep increasing. And it's really interesting, because I mentioned someone like Irving Berlin, who lived into his 90s or so, but some of the people, Paul McCartney, I mean, he's late 70s, maybe 80. People like Sting, Picasso. I mean, if they're able to do that and they don't die at 27 or 29 like Hank Williams or Kurt Cobain or Jimi Hendrix, whatever, you can have a very, very long, wonderful life, I think, doing something that you like.
I kind of think about Dave Grohl when you use that analogy
exactly.
too.
That's a good comparison there, yeah.
I remember I was there when Nirvana appeared on the scene, and Kurt Cobain was remarkable musician and songwriter, and he was, it was all about Kurt,
Yeah.
And then sadly he died, and
right.
then other things happened. Dave went off and started doing his other stuff. And,
Sure.
at first I think maybe, there was a head scratching. I wonder what's going to come up of this. Now, later on I look at it and it struck me one day and I thought, it's like, Dave Grohl's done a whole lot more music since the Nirvana days.
Interesting. Yeah.
It kind of leaves that as like just a moment on the timeline, but they're all wonderful things. But as a kid growing up into music, I would hear similar stories about bands from the 60s or 70s that had been a big thing and then broken up, and then one band member goes off and does something.
Right.
And as a kid, I only heard about the one band member doing something. I heard about Peter Gabriel having a hit song, but I didn't know anything. I didn't know about Genesis until later. That kind of thing.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah.
There's always a story like that of bands coming up and splitting off and
sure,
and see what people do. Let's talk for a moment about the approach to songwriting and the difference of writing lyrics sort of literally versus metaphorically and impressionistically. And what does that mean to you? And is it important to be aware of those things?
I am definitely aware of those things and try to... There's a funny thing that happens when you write a song is that very often you have this idea and you think that you're writing the song, which you are. And I was saying how you might do things that are sort of logical, like look up the title. You might try to come up with, there's got to be some magic with the melody. But I mean, you come up with the beginning, the makings of a melody, which, will continue to evolve. And then, especially in Nashville, an awful lot of the time is spent working out the lyrics. I would say sometimes that first section we're talking about can be accomplished in a few minutes sometimes, or it can be longer, but it could take days or weeks to sometimes get the lyrics right, although sometimes it happens quickly. So, and then one of those little, I mentioned that there might be at least 3 or 4 people inside you, but there's this one of the little things that your mind bounces stuff off when you hear something or think of something is what kind of song is that? I mean, is that going to be is it going to be a metaphorical type, and lyrics have, the more I do it, the more in awe I am of great songwriting, because they just seem to work on different levels. One of the things with lyrics is the singability, just the fact that it sings smoothly. Maybe the one aspect of that is ending like with a open vowel sounds or whatever that will just be easy for the singer to sing. But a funny thing happens in the process of writing a song is you start out writing the song, and then the song starts writing you. All right, maybe I'm not saying that correctly, but the song takes on a life of its own. And instead of you writing the song, you have to start looking at the song and see where it wants to go. So it could be a very literal type thing that's, or in some cases, it could be communicating through very, very different ways. And I think that might come with experience. But as I said earlier, I mean, if you've got something that you think is good, it might be really, really good. So you just have this sense of whether it works or not. And at that point, I can't really think of any examples. But sometimes the best songs seem to be very, very simple, but you can't stop listening to them. There's something new there every time.
Simple and complex, right?
Yeah, they're simple, and I mean, Blake Shelton has this new song out called "God's Country," and it's just an incredible record. Scott Hendricks produced it, and I can't remember the writers, but I wish I could because it's such a good song. But it's like every line has these incredible pictures that say different things, and it's not exactly literal. It's maybe a good example of what you're saying, because there's there's one line in there, I can't remember, being washed in something that referred to like being baptized or something in a creek, and the end of it is with the dogs running, both of which are Southern images of, being baptized in the water and then having the dogs run. But the dogs, if they're coonhounds, they're going to be running at night, so they're not going to be running when someone is being baptized. I don't think, maybe not, but it works absolutely perfectly. So, but maybe not in the most literal sense. It just has all these images that just draw at your heart. I'm maybe not being correct about a few of those words or lines, but and then you can't stop listening to it. It just so I don't know. Did that answer your question? Or
sure. Yeah.
And some of my favorite songs, I couldn't really. I mean, I'm a stickler for lyrics, but I couldn't really tell you what they're about. And I just know that they work. Well,
it's that, in Pat Pattison's teaching, he talks about the difference between. That.
You said it was really
it was great. I went to the clinic up in Boston recently, and it was just a lot of fun.
Awesome.
And half the fun was just taking an adventure and taking a trip somewhere and focusing on songwriting for a day, But he talked about the difference between telling and showing. And, lyric that tells, like, I got up, I had coffee, I went to work, I was tired, I came home, I went to bed, versus like, got up, dragged a comb across my hair.
Yeah.
I forgot the rest of the Beatles lyrics there, but, the rushing out the door and the smell of the coffee and the, the sweat down your back for exhaustion or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Those are show lyrics that paint a picture. And then as a listener, the experience becomes yours. You own it. Like you are conjuring up a vision of the place you're in.
Absolutely.
That's personal and that can draw you in.
Yeah. That's a very good, that was a very good point there.
Yeah. And I enjoy that. And that's been getting up and trying to do the object writing for me has been trying to learn how to show instead of tell.
Right.
In describing things.
Right.
And then also the very difficult. To show, the first thing that might happen is I might write something down. I'm like, oh, I'm showing it. That's great. That sounds great. And then look at it and then go like, and actually be excited about it, even though it's a complete cliche that I just wrote down. And then the next stage of difficulty is to go back and go like, all right. That's a total cliche. Now delete that and say it some other way. And, keep pushing and digging deeper.
Yeah.
Which is tricky. I know, in the country music world, it must be a tricky balance sometimes, because sometimes what can be very popular might be a very clever use of cliche without being too cliche.
Yeah.
You have any thoughts on that?
Well, cliches are cliches for a reason, so I'm just trying to think of some.
Maybe we should explain what a cliche is in case somebody's wondering.
Maybe you can explain it. You just took the course.
Well, I mean, it wasn't a course on defining cliches so much,
right.
but I think it's just something that is, it's an expression or a saying that's been around so long that it becomes a way of suggesting something, but we actually have no idea what it's all about, or it doesn't mean anything to us.
Yeah. It's hard to say, but I'm just one of my favorite lines of, I mentioned the Sam Hunt record, Body Like a Back Road. I can't remember the exact lyrics, but he meets the girl, he calls her up and finally gets a date with her. And it's been almost, I may be getting this wrong, but it's been almost 2 weeks or a few weeks, whatever. Now, me and her go way back like Cadillac seats.
Nice.
I mean, it is just, I mean, it just says so much. And that song actually is one I think that I read an interview with one of the writers, and they worked on that for a long time. And
really?
I think that was one of the very last lines they came up with.
Well, let's break that down for just a sec. Okay. So me and her go way back like Cadillac seats. So that's grammatically, that's a simile. It's saying it's not a metaphor because it says like Cadillac seats. And then a Cadillac seat immediately makes me think of it leaning way back. But like the hidden meaning there is that, what happens in back seats
Yeah.
when they go way back. And so they're going
he's
way
cruising
back,
down the road with this girl, and we just have a picture of them leaning the seats back or whatever, and let you take it from there.
Yeah, hopefully they stopped cruising down the road at that point.
This is right.
Maybe this is at the drive-in.
At the same time, right. So, yeah, but that's, it's interesting. But there is that aspect. It's hard to describe when a song, you start writing it and then it sort of takes on a life of its own, and then you have to start listening to the song and then see where it wants to go. Yeah. And there's, I don't know.
Personal versus universal.
What's that?
Personal versus universal. So
what you want to do is say something in a personal way that has a universal appeal. So, and that's what the imagery that you're talking about showing, rather than is you want to, at least I do as a writer, I would like it to translate to as many people as possible, that they could relate to what I'm trying to say. So, but the way you would do that would be by coming up with something sort of personal, as you were saying, and that's relatable in a universal way, I would say. And I'm already being much more theoretical than I ever even think about when I'm doing.
Yeah, it's funny how that goes, right? It's like studying English in college or something. You're looking back on creative works in hindsight. It's
right.
Often easier to start analyzing and breaking down things as if that was part of the process moving forward. But
yeah, I remember I had
maybe not.
An English professor that we were studying Ezra Pound and some of the writers in Paris. I think it was they developed something called the Imagist movement of poetry. And I remember at the end of one of the classes, he said, "I just want you to remember this. They wrote these poems like when they were living this wild life and smoking whatever and drinking absinthe. And then once they were successful, then they started this theory called the Imagist movement to sort of explain themselves or to give themselves some validity or something. But I think it just has to be done, and then later.
Yeah, it's probably true of Nashville. It was just music was being written here, and then it became the Nashville country music sound. And Seattle, it was Nirvana and other bands coming out of there, and then it became the Seattle sound and grunge.
Yeah,
it's
an exciting
always
time to be in Nashville. I mean, there's just so much great music here, and I mean, there's the country stuff, but then there's incredibly great things happening with the country records. And do you know Dan Arbach,
Black
Have you interviewed him here?
No, but I'm hoping he'll come on the show. And
there's a couple of albums he's done recently. I think it's D. White. Just incredibly good records that so incredibly beautiful melodically, and it's interesting. And there's a lady, I believe he produced her. I can't remember her name. It just came out just recently. Both of these are recently. These on Warner Brothers, and he's pulled in a number of these really great writers that have had hits many years ago. People like Roger Cook, who's had hits continually for over the years, but and Bobby Wood. They worked on a lot of the Crystal Gale records with Alan Reynolds and all. Wrote a bunch of those great songs. But Roger also wrote things like "I'd Like to Teach the World to Sing" and what are some of his others? Is it the lady in a black dress? What's that song? The long, tall lady in a black dress. Yeah, okay. And, just bunches and bunches of others. But One Day at a Time is one of my favorites that he had with George Strait. And remember, Here Comes That Rainy Day Feeling Again. Here comes that rainy day feeling again. That was him as an artist. So, and I don't know Roger really well, but I've known him for a long time, and just gifted guy. Speaking of musician, he writes everything on a ukulele.
Right.
Just a ukulele. So
I never really learned how to play a ukulele. I picked it up and I've messed with it. I think the secret is to stop worrying about how to do the chords.
Yeah.
It's okay that you're only playing with one or two fingers. I
remember I was with him one time there was some party or something a year or two ago, and someone he's from England, and someone was complaining about the financial challenges nowadays with the music business, and he said, it's simple, mate. Just write a hit song and finish it. But I think that is, an answer to the big songs back in the day, in the current day, whatever. I mean, they can do very well financially, in spite of streaming or whatever you want to call it. I mean, a hit song is going to make quite a bit of money. So just write a hit.
This show is sponsored by Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you are ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I mastered my own record, Skadoosh, using nothing but plugins in PreSonus Studio One. These techniques would work for you in whichever DAW you are using right now. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads to mix in your own studio, and even include in your mixing portfolio if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. So let me ask something about co-writing. I know in the past, you and I've heard other people talk about, choosing to co-write with a destination in mind. Like maybe you're co-writing with an artist who is moving forward with their career, or
right.
maybe you're co-writing because a particular artist is looking for a song. Should people who are thinking about collaborating, is it smart for them to just find somebody that they feel very creative with, or to be thinking about, I should really co-write with, find other artists in my region where I am, let's say they're not in Nashville, and just co-write with them because I know they're going to release these songs and they're going to get out there?
I would say both. I mean, it's really not going to work with an artist unless you have that creative spark. And if you have someone you have that creative spark with, I'd absolutely write with them. So, I just try to follow the music. If it's good, it will probably find a way. If you're trying to write something you think is going to be commercial, but you don't really get it, it's not coming out of your heart, it never works. At least it never works for me. I've never had it.
It'll just be a learning experience.
Yeah, but I often, if I'm working with an artist, I'll just, we'll just talk. I'll say, what's been going on with you? Maybe they just wrecked their car. It's just something that it can evolve from there. And then I'll often say, so you're out, you're going to be doing your album this summer. You've already cut some tracks. What do you have that might be missing? We're looking for a mid-tempo sort of a ballad, and my girlfriend and we just got engaged or something. So, that would give you a direction to sort of move into. It's usually not a ballad they're looking for. It's usually like an up-tempo radio song. That's what our record company says we need. Catch
people's attention.
But it's interesting. Go ahead. I didn't.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was going to say that when you speak about that creative spark or whatever, that some of my co-writers that I've had the best luck with we're sort of friends, but we're not. Sometimes the best, you would think if you have an awful lot in common with someone, you're big buddies, and you're just
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. Also, remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with these weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free
just better,
mixing
like
course
the,
at mixmasterbundle.com.
Rich
Look for
Fagan
the
or
link in the
something
show
who's working on
notes. And if you
something
want more free
I might be
content from
having
Recording
trouble
Studio
with the line,
Rockstars,
and
all
they
you
say
have to
something,
do is go
and I
to
go, "Man, that's just
rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's
They might say the same thing, and you end up with something that's really better than
rsrockstars.com/email
both
to
of them.
enter your
Right,
name
it's
and
like if
email,
you're-
and
if
I'll
you're
keep
both
you in the
salt
loop
and
with
trying to make
articles,
soup out of it,
videos,
you're just gonna
podcast
be
updates,
salty
and even
soup.
free gear
Yeah,
giveaways
it's just-
for your
it's tricky,
studio.
but there's no
totally
real
free.
rules.
Thanks for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is
Working
Recording
recently with
Studio
a guy named
Rockstars.
David
Now,
Ross, who's
go
been a
make
friend
great
of mine
music.
for years, and we've come up with some stuff I think is fantastic recently, and worked with some artists too, and we seem to work well that way together. So, and he's a great writer. So,
And this maybe is just, maybe this will be a surprise answer, or maybe it'll reinforce what you already said. And without mentioning names, have you ever co-written with somebody where the co-write energy is great, but you feel like we'd never hang out together?
yeah, probably.
Yeah, probably. That's probably about as much of an answer as you could give without it,
Yeah, I would say
without
so.
divulging anyway.
Yeah, because especially with some artists, I want to say this in a nice way because it's sometimes the best artists are they're not going to really have time for me anyhow. But if they did, I mean, they are just so career obsessed and so self obsessed that they really don't have a whole lot of whatever their attention span is to really care about too many other people.
Right, and
And
that's
this, to
sort of
me, in
required.
ways, is the ideal artist because they're the one that wants to get out there and physically need to be in front of a crowd every night to have that sort of, adulation or whatever you'd want to call it. So, but I wouldn't say that's not in a negative way. I guess is like
No,
the
it's just
question was, but
that's
it's
the
like
job description. For
yeah,
what
sort of,
they're doing.
but say just because you're not friends or close friends with someone, it's just really not in the equation that you're going to be friends, but you sure think a lot of each other and have a lot of respect for each other. And then sometimes they call you again. So,
Well, I mean, as I'm asking the question, I can see sessions that I've done here as a producer or engineer where I've worked very well with a musician on the other end of a microphone.
Yeah.
And we're working very well together. But as soon as the session's over, we're going two different ways, and that's the end of that.
Yeah.
I mean, other than being friendly, if we ran into each other somewhere.
I think that's that's something I've thought about a fair amount through the years, both working engineering and co-writing, is that often you're working with people in a very intense, I mean, you're shoulder to shoulder in a studio, working over the console or this or that, and sometimes writing with someone and people be talking about stuff that's incredibly personal. And that's sometimes where the great stuff can come out of, and you're sharing these thoughts. And then when it's over, it's sort of over. And you may not see them for a while. I remember, if you read Daniel Lanois' book, you worked with him.
No, I
didn't you,
should.
at
Yeah,
Woodland years ago?
yeah, he did Wrecking Ball, Emilio Harris at Woodland
So I know
Studios.
you worked with him over there at the studio. But he talked, it's really a great book. What is it, Soul Mining? Is that it?
I think it is. Yeah. That's the one that Michael Lovett. We got to give a shout out to McLovin.
Mike
by the way.
Lovett, hey.
Live on the
one of my favorite
podcast.
songwriting partners.
So
and
Steve,
our favorite songwriting
Rockstars,
partners.
Michael Lovett and Steve and I co-wrote a song together. What was the name of that song?
I can't remember.
It was something, oh man, it'll come back to us here in a minute.
It's a good one. I remember pitching it a bunch.
But we, I'll come back to that. Maybe I can even include that link or something like that.
But he wanted to.
Yeah.
Oh no! Finish your thought.
No. So Michael introduced us both to that book, to the Soul Mining book.
All
Yeah.
right. And I don't know Daniel. I've met him a few times. Super nice guy. But when I've been around him, and so talented. But he, speaking of Wrecking Ball, he did a show a couple of years ago over at Marathon Music Works, where he and Emmylou Harris and what's his drummer's Brian Blade? Is it?
Brian Blade, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So they recreated that album beginning to end, and it was.
Although that record was Larry Mullins Jr. from U2.
Right, he played on it with the actual record, so he got Brian Blade to come in and fill in. So, but that was one of the best shows I've ever seen in my life. I mean, he did not phone it in. He was there with that gold Les Paul and the Supro amp and singing harmonies at the
and the
top of it.
Echoplex.
Yeah, everything. It was just
And
amazing.
the Daniel Lanois tuning with like the double A strings or something like that. I forget what it was.
So, but that's a fantastic book for everybody, rock stars especially. But he talks about some great. For example, with Bob Dylan, he did 2 albums. I think one of them won a Grammy, maybe both. Who knows? I know he won one for Wrecking Ball. He and Emmylou, and he talks about Bob Dylan wanting to write do an album of certain kinds of songs. So Daniel went and got those records. Some of them were old 45s or 78s, and put them on in his recording thing, and then played chords along with them. And then scrapped the recording, so he just had the chords and the grooves. And then he and Bob Dylan sat together over a kitchen table in New York or somewhere and wrote songs to those grooves.
Oh, interesting.
And then he did another album in New Orleans where he had moved his studio from one building to another. And actually, Dylan talks about that in his book in a little more detail. And
what's interesting, you talk about I love hearing stories of the search for what this record should be.
Yeah.
And you just described Daniel's process of if I'm hearing you correctly, it was like, I wanted to have, or maybe Bob said, I wanted to have this kind of feel to it. So then let's go to those original things and see if we can extract the feel like a tincture, But that's kind of a version of writing from a title.
Yeah, that's it. And it's also a thing of working with an artist, like from a writing or producing or whatever basis. But to continue with your previous thought, he talks about just intense times together, writing these songs and working and recording, trying this and trying that, finally coming out with at least one of them, I think, won a Grammy. Can't remember the album titles. And then he says, well, the last time I saw Bob Dylan, I was driving down PCH in Malibu, and he pulled up next to me or something in something like a Bonneville convertible or something, and he's wearing a cowboy hat, and we said hello and waved, and he drove on. So it is tricky, being that close and having, such a great rapport and so much admiration for people. But, people have busy lives. And as I was trying to say earlier, if an artist is busy, they're out on the road singing songs I worked with them on, then, I hopefully am collecting a few cents, and I'm glad to have them doing it. So
let's talk about a song that you co-wrote and recorded the demo on that went on to be a hit, Rock My World, Little Country Girl, Brooks and Dunn. Tell us the story behind that.
I co-wrote that with a guy named Bill LaBounty, incredibly talented guy, a friend of mine. And that was another one. I'm trying to remember the details. We were working on another song, and it wasn't really going anywhere. And Bill and I had been friends, and every once in a while we'd go to see a movie. Neither one of us was doing anything particular evening or whatever. I used to do a lot of work in my studio with Bill's wife, Becky Foster, who's an incredible songwriter, and do some of her demos. I think can't remember where she was writing, but both super talented people. And so that song wasn't going anywhere, and Bill had said, we'd seen that Madonna movie with Sandra Bernhard was in it, and she said to Madonna, has anybody rocked your world recently? And that phrase stuck in Bill's mind, I guess. He said, remember we saw that movie a while back, and Sandra Bernhard said that about Rock My World, and maybe we could write a song called Rock My World. And I remember picking up, there was an old Les Paul there, and playing a lick sort of in reference to Creedence Clearwater, and singing, yeah, we can make it country, rock my world, little country girl. And he said, I like that. And he started playing the piano and hit his drum machine. And the first half of that song came pretty quickly. The first 2 verses, we even used Madonna in there because it just popped out, acts like Madonna but listens to Merle. And but we sort of got, it was the end of the day, and we had the chorus started. And then Bill and Becky were friends with Don Cook, who co-produced that record with Scott Hendricks, the Brooks and Dunn's record. And Don had heard it, and I think Becky played it for him. And and he said, that sounds like something Brooks and Dunn might do, and we might need another song for the album in that vein for Kix to sing. And that line, acts like Madonna but listens to Merle, sounds like a lot of the young girls coming to our concerts back then at the time. So we worked really, really hard on that. And we got together a lot of times. I can't remember, but it felt like maybe half a dozen times, and had a little difficulty finishing it. And I remember Bill, as I recall, the last line of the song is Sunday she's all ribbons and curls, and rhyming with Rock My World, Little Country Girl. And I remember, I believe he came up with that line, and I said, that's great, Bill. She can just go out and party or have a great time Saturday night, but she's basically a sweet girl. And at that point, it sort of gave us a clue or direction to finish it. So we did. And Bill's wife, Becky, had spoke to Don and FedExed out a copy of the song. We did the demo. I think we cut the tracks at Bill's place, and then I mixed it over at my place and finished it up because we had similar things. And they liked it. Bill called me up and said they were singing it to him over the phone. And
that's probably an exciting moment, huh?
Yeah. Well, sort of. I take things with a grain of, just after many years in the music business, you never really know what's going to happen. So, but I was excited about that. And then Bill had a really great publisher at the time, Pat Higdon, who he was writing for. And Pat, I think, helped the process along. And especially after it got recorded, I think was helpful in the song being a single. So we were just fortunate working with great people like him and Bill and Becky and Don and Scott and Kix and Ronnie. They just... we were fortunate.
That's pretty exciting, man.
Especially since those guys are incredible writers. I mean, they, all those songs like, Boot Scootin' Boogie and, just Neon Moon. I mean, just, what was the one about the, like a diamond ring in Mexico, like looking for a diamond ring, whatever. Just so many great songs. And the Red Dirt Road, they've just, so we were very, very fortunate to.
That's great.
Yeah.
What about the process of going from demo to album cut? Any lessons learned there about how to make, what it means to make a demo before the album or how to make it right?
A lot of the demos that in fact, I think I sent you an MP3 in case you wanted to include it in the interview or something of the demo we did for Rock My World. It was a very simple demo, just keyboard, drums, one finger bass part, and a vocal. So it was 4, maybe a harmony part too, so 5 tracks. I was fortunate to work with a lot of really, really good writers when I was running my studio. I never advertised, and they would end up coming over there. The first hit I had demoed, not my song, was a song called Dixieland Delight, which recorded by Alabama, written by Ronnie Rogers. And that demo was 2 acoustic guitars, a vocal, and a harmony. Very simple, and it sounded incredible. And I remember is it
called Dixieland Delight?
Dixieland
Was
Delight.
Will Ferrell singing on it?
What's that?
It was Will Ferrell. Dixieland Delight.
No. This is a long time ago. It was I think it's their biggest airplay.
That was my reference to Anchorman, the movie there.
Oh, okay, all right. So, but I remember with that one, they were having such a good time playing it that they just kept playing at the end, and they just got these incredible guitar parts. Tom Johnson was playing, a guitarist who's playing just 2 acoustic guitars. And I remember when I was mixing it, I said to Ronnie, this fade sounds incredible. We should leave it on there. Maybe someone would, if they thought you were having a good time playing it, they might have a good time recording it. So we had left a long fade, a couple of minutes of guitar at the end. And but that was a relatively simple demo. And a lot of John Hyatt's stuff, I think I demoed most of the songs which he had, maybe with one exception, that were hits. A brilliant guy, just a genius guy. And he would play everything himself usually. And once again, relatively simple. Pam Rose, Marianne Kennedy, and Pat Bunch, Todd Cerny, they wrote songs like I'll Still Be Loving You for Restless Heart, which I think got a Grammy nomination, definitely got a CMA nomination. My advice, it's a very delicate line to walk with demos, though, is if you can sort of have it be a relatively simple demo, and it might be a full demo and maybe not, that just sounds great, then I think a producer or artist can hear it and go, wow, this sounds great with just a couple of guitars and a drum machine, and someone obviously did it in their basement or something, but if it sounds that good there, like a big-time producer like me could make a hell of a record with this. So,
right.
There's that. That's not true in every case. There's really no rules, but I would say if you have a choice between doing a relatively simple piano vocal, guitar vocal, but very high quality, or just a few instruments, where if you hear a lick in there, that you make sure to put that in there. If you're writing "Sunshine of My Love," make sure to go do 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 do. Okay, so but if you can do that, I think you're better off than doing an overly produced cookie cutter demo that maybe has fantastic musicians, but they're doing half a dozen songs in one session. It sounds just exactly like what's on the radio now, but in a year from now, it's going to sound dated.
Right. So excellent advice. So if you do that cookie cutter version, it sounds just like what's hot on the radio now.
You're out of date.
When the producer hears it, they're going to go, oh, I'm sick of that style of music. I don't want to do that.
That producer's making records for a year and a half from now.
Yeah, interesting. Whereas it's kind of like that thing where you have a great melody and you're sort of pulled to want to sing harmonies on top of it in the studio.
Yeah.
But sometimes you should leave the harmony off, because that leaves the one for the person who's listening to sing along to.
Right.
And sort of like make up their own harmony.
Yeah. If you, I think that's true. But once again, there's no rules. I think Warner Brothers, I think Scott Hendricks might have done this or something. This has been a few years ago. I think they put out a couple of albums of songs where they would have the demos, and then just so people could hear what the demos
right, before
were.
and after stuff.
Yeah, like the Tim McGraw, what was that big song, one of many, many that he's had, Live Like You Were Dying, which Tim Nicholls co-wrote with Craig Wiseman, I believe. And, that was a full demo. It's a great demo. It's every little, lick that's on there was, very tastefully done, and suggestions of, some great parts in there, many of which were used on the record. That's a great example of a full demo.
I've heard the flip side, where some people have said, if you're a player and you play on the demo and you play a nice guitar line, a lot of times it might be very likely you're going to hear that exact same line in the master later.
Absolutely, yeah. It happens.
Which can be a good thing, but sometimes you can feel a little bit like, hey, I wrote that.
Yeah. That's a tricky thing. I think the session players it's one of the most challenging aspects of the music business. One of the most challenging jobs, but I just have so much just admiration for them. I mean, even after doing it so many years, I'll go into a session and someone will play somebody or work tape or something, and these guys will be drinking coffee, kidding around, talking about golf or fishing or whatever, and well, you all ready to put one down? And like, look at the engineer. Well, you might as well try to then just play it. It's like, wow. I mean, they might do it another time or two, but it's like it just goes from nothing into something that just sounds like it ought to be on the radio. So that's sort of a different. Well, many people do both, but to be a session player, I mean, they've got to be so creative constantly, day in and day out, and one song after another, coming up with those great hook licks and stuff.
And
so,
there's not a lot of opportunity to try out the wrong answer.
Yeah.
You just simply put down the right answer first.
Right.
It's an interesting thing. Tell us about your studio now.
So it's the same physical space. It's relatively small. I've got a sort of a basic Pro Tools setup. I've got other DAWs. I've got Logic and Studio One. I've recently been trying to learn Ableton. A number of writers that I work with are more and more using that just because of the ability to work on arrangements and stuff. So
let me ask you this.
Yeah.
So for somebody like yourself who's not engineer first, yet you just named 4 different DAWs.
Right.
What do you think draws you to wanting to know a little bit about each of these?
Basically, I think if I get a new DAW, I won't have to write songs because it'll make it better. No, I don't know. No, I'm just always looking for new. I just love the whole recording process, so I'm always.
Have you discovered things about each of those 4 that you're like, I'd probably use this for that and this for that, or not necessarily?
Really, and part of this is because so many people use Pro Tools in town. It's sort of a standard in Nashville, but I really have been using Pro Tools almost exclusively. I love Pro Tools. I like the other ones too very much, but I don't want to have to learn new key commands and just be confused. When I sit down there, I can't remember if it's your left brain or right brain. I just want to be thinking about creative, just automatically know what to do. I'll keep the template up there, where I can just sort of sit down. I've got a keyboard ready to go, guitar, electric guitar, bass. They're just hanging on the wall, and I can.
Well, that's cool. I think we have a variety of DAWs represented by the rock stars listening to this. But top of that list is still Pro Tools.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times I work with a lot of people that use Logic and other Studio One too, actually, and probably Logic is an Ableton or. Well, Studio One too. It does incredible. They all do some incredible stuff. The other ones won't do.
Yeah.
But I'll just work with them all the time, and they'll just export files and send them to me by Dropbox, or we transfer, and then I'll put them in Pro Tools and just make sure your sample rates are consistent, your bit depth, and all.
In my experience, the opportunity to learn a new DAW usually falls under, I'm going to just write a song in this new DAW.
That's a good way to do it.
Once you're in there, you're like, you kind of can't bail.
Yeah.
And I think that also the internal creative drive of being in that writing and wanting to get a part down is almost enough momentum to like push you through having to figure out what the key command is to how do I do this one little simple thing.
I think in anything creative, there's an incredible advantage to not knowing what you're doing. Because, it's absolutely true. I mean, you'll sit down, you'll hook something up backwards, you'll put something in there at the wrong sample rate. It comes out at a different speed it wasn't supposed to be. You don't know till later. I've had just crazy things happen that if it's a cool sound, I'll try to, capture it or something. But you're forced into a new something or other, and that sound or whatever can inspire some different lyrical ideas or grooves or whatever. Did you subscribe to sounds.com?
I don't know.
Yeah, that's a cool thing. I think who's the company that what's the but
what is it?
It's run by one of the
sound library?
Yeah, but they have new stuff all the time, and it's like $10 a month, and I don't use it all the time, but I've gotten some really good grooves. But as you're saying with a different DAW, sometimes I'll just sit there with headphones on and just randomly, come up with some, hip hop beat and combine it with something. And next thing you know,
I like that process too.
Yeah. So
Bill Demain, who was on the podcast as well, was talking about what he learned from interviewing David Bowie. David Bowie said that he liked to approach every new songwriting and every album with a beginner's mind. Yeah. And you just remind me that that's what it is. You go into a brand new DAW. Right. And you're forced to have a beginner's mind because you don't know how to do stuff.
Yeah. You can't change the tempo. You can't see where the tempo change button is. So
so just stick with that tempo.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy little stuff like that.
So Steve, let me jump to our closing question here. We're going to take the hypothetical Wayback Studio machine and go back in time. You're going to find young Steve who's thinking about moving to Nashville to write songs. And you say, listen, dude, here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio, and writing songs yourself one day. What advice would you go back and give yourself if you could?
I'm pretty happy right now, so I don't know that I'd say to do anything different. I'd just say follow your heart.
Nice.
Yeah. I mean, just if that's what you want to do, find a way to do it.
Well, you seem like you've always been a very peaceful, mellow dude who just sort of really is smiling at life whenever I run into you. So that seems like really good advice.
You're always smiling too.
Well, dude, thanks so much for being on Recording Studio Rockstars with us, man. Let the Rockstars know how they can find you online. How can they go check out your music and follow you?
Website, steveobrien.music.com. I'm on different social media, I guess, Twitter, Steve OB123, Instagram as well, Steve OB123. I'm on Facebook, and email is info@steveobrienmusic.com.
Right on. O''BRIEN.
That's how I spell it, but on the email, there's no apostrophe.
Right,
I don't think it
You
looks
can't
like
put
it's
apostrophe.
OBRIEN, right.
All right, cool. Steve, what a pleasure, man.
Great pleasure, Lee.
Super fun hanging with you.
Honored
And you shared a lot of wonderful, wonderful insights about making music and writing songs. So thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right, we'll see you around the studio, dude. Cheers.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. Also, remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with these weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free mixing course at mixmasterbundle.com. Look for the link in the show notes. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio, all totally free. Thanks for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.